I'm Chase Kantor, creator of Alice of Spades, and you're listening to True North Country Comics Podcast.
Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. On this episode, I chat with Chase Kantor about his Alice of Spades comic book series and more in advance of Toronto Comicon 2024. This podcast is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel. Toronto Comicon is a spectacular 3-day sci-fi, horror, anime, gaming, and comic book event in Canada that attracts thousands of people that come to the Metro Toronto Convention Centre. Chase Kantor is a writer and color artist living in Edmonton, Alberta. Chase launched his debut graphic novel, The Saga of the Jack of Spades, in 2019 through Renegade Arts Entertainment. The sequel, Alice of Spades, is currently underway, and according to Chase, he has way too many cats. Alice of Spades continues the story of a kingdom on the brink of revolution. Alice, now the sole heir to the Spade throne, is the target of a group of religious zealots bent on twisting her to their cause. With only her lazy cat and the clothes on her back, Alice must flee her privileged life and embark on a journey where any turn could be her last. So, without further ado, here's my chat with Chase Kantor about his Alice of Spades comic book series and more in advance of Toronto Comicon 2024. So, Chase Kantor, thank you very much for taking time to chat with me.
Not a problem. Happy to be here.
I appreciate your time. Before I get started with all the questions, I'd like to know, what are you reading today? What's on your bedside reading table?
When I am not doom scrolling on TikTok, I did start TMNT, the IDW collection, and I'm about halfway through the first volume. I know I'm a little late to the game, but I've been meaning to pick this up for a while, and it's really dope. I suggest everyone pick up a copy.
Yeah, I'm hearing a lot of people say good things about it. I think there's a big anniversary of the Turtles going on right now, too, so it's a good thing.
Don't remind me. It'll remind me how old I am.
No. It's all good. And it's great to reread this stuff, too. The new stuff that's coming out and the old stuff. It's all good. It's all good. So we're talking here today because you're going to be tabling at Toronto Comicon 2024. So with that in mind, I'd like to know, what is it about conventions that you like the most?
I didn't always like conventions, and it took the pandemic to make me really see them through a different perspective. When I kind of first started out in comics, I just kind of saw it as oh yeah, this is a way to make money, and that's kind of was my sole focus for the first year or two of tabling. And what the pandemic taught me, when I couldn't do these conventions anymore, was I didn't really miss that part of it. I really missed the community and getting to chat with people that I seldom saw or would see maybe 1 or 2 times a year, and then also getting to talk about my books and talk about what other people were reading and seeing what they were enjoying at the convention, and kind of just chatting with people. And that was something that I didn't realize that I missed quite a bit about conventions. So I'm excited to to chat with more people about what they got on the go.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I can appreciate that for sure. Working in a basement, sequestered and doing stuff sometimes isn't the most fun. So it's nice to get out and about. So I get that.
Absolutely. And especially with comics, because sometimes it can just be very solitary, so having that opportunity to kind of get out, see the sun every once in a while. Well, not a great example, because usually in a convention you don't get to see the sun all weekend. But getting out and chatting with your friends and seeing what everyone's up to is kind of the best part for me.
Sure. Now, I'd like to know, because you've been to a lot of conventions and festivals, do you have any favorite moments, memories that stand out?
Yes. So the first time that I was it was my first show in the States. I got into Emerald City was very excited about it because it was, the largest show that I had ever attended before. I'd, only done a few Canadian shows at that time. I've done Calgary and Edmonton, and they're big shows, but like nothing really prepares you for how big Emerald City is. It's like it's a 4-day show. There's tens of thousands of people that attend that show over those 4 days, and I was so overwhelmed with how many people were actually there and how many people I was talking to, that when I was, chatting with some people about the book, and I was, explaining what my story was, at that point, I only had, I think a couple issues of Jack of Spades done at that point. I was really excited to actually talk to these people about it, and they were like really into, that the whole swashbuckling genre, and we really took a deep dive into like old Zorro flicks and Princess Bride and all these inspirations that kind of went into making that book. And we had such a lovely conversation that I completely forgot to tell them that I wrote the bloody thing.
Oh, no.
And at the time, my artist, Dan Schneider, was in Artist Alley upstairs, which is, like another building away. And I was telling them, exactly how to find Dan in order to get a signature, because this person wanted to get everyone's signature who worked on the book. And I told them very succinctly, this is how you go find Dan. I wasn't there for this part, but they found Dan, they got his signature. Dan looks at the book and it's like, well, you didn't get Chase to sign. And they go, well, Chase isn't here. And Dan's like, no, they're downstairs. Who are you talking to? It's like, oh, this guy downstairs was chatting to me about this book. It's like, well, that's Chase. Oh. And they come back downstairs, braving the masses, and find me and like, hey, you didn't sign. It's like, yes, I know. I realized that I forgot to tell you that I actually wrote this thing. Wow. So that kind of stands out as something that I remember almost every single convention. I try to remember to tell people, hey, I wrote this thing.
That's right. That'll never happen again.
Well, fingers crossed. Yeah.
So speaking about Toronto Comicon, I'd like to know, what will you have on your table when people come by to see you?
So this year I'm going to have the Saga of the Jack of Spades Volume 1 that I've had for a couple of years now. And we just released last year the sequel / spinoff, Alice of Spades, which is kind of a continuation in that same universe. And we have decks of cards that are specifically made that depict characters that appear in the series. So I have a couple different decks of cards now that you can pick up, and I've actually just started to get into tarot as well. That's kind of been a big influence on some of the mythology in this fantasy series that I'm working on. And I took all of October. So for the first time in my life, I participated in Inktober.
Oh, right.
I didn't do it correctly. You're supposed to do it every single day, but I don't think of myself as an artist. And this was kind of like my first time kind of wading into that territory. So I did 22 cards of the major arcana, and they kind of lined up with, like 22 working days of October. So I took weekends off, but I drew them all. I colored them all. I actually posted all of them on TikTok as well. So you can see kind of like a start to finish, my process for creating this tarot deck. And this will be the first show that you can actually purchase it. So I figured out how to print it. They're all, handmade, hand cut. I did it all myself, and I'm really proud with how it turned out. So this will be the first time that you can pick up a tarot deck from me.
Nice. Good stuff. Now, I mean, you're talking about what you're going to have at the show, but do you have any other projects on the go that are coming down the road that you can talk about?
Yes. So I am currently, I'm working on two things at the moment. The first one, I caught the bug. I found out that I love, I love drawing. So I've kind of started working on Volume 2 of Jack of Spades. It's been written for a long time, but I challenged myself to at least take on like the first 12 pages, and I'm kind of a third of the way through it. It's slow going, but that's kind of what I'm working on. I don't know when this is going to get done or how it's going to be released, but it's, something that I'm actively working on. One day, maybe in the future, it will actually be released.
Sure.
I'm also working on a slight deviation from what I usually do. I'm usually the fantasy guy. I wrote a sci-fi mystery graphic novel that I'm actually getting to produce right now. And I've just found an artist who is absolutely fantastic. I'm super excited to be working with him. And we're going to be putting that out probably January to March, sometime next year. It's a self-contained story. It's kind of a throwback to like the classic whodunit type genre, but it's got a sci-fi twist and hopefully a story that people haven't seen before. So we're really excited to be putting that out.
Good to hear. Now, you were saying that you're focusing more on your art these days. So I wanted to know, what is your go-to tool for creating art? What do you got going on?
I predominantly work with Procreate and Photoshop. I'm mainly doing that because I hear great things about Clip Studio and I want to learn it, but I'm a little bit at capacity for learning new programs. But yeah, no, I started working with Procreate way back in the day when I first started coloring comics. That was something that was suggested to me by someone I was taking a course with. And it really simplified the process, especially for people that are, kind of just getting into digital art or coloring comics digitally. I think it's a really simplified version of Photoshop. And I think that the quality and the results kind of speak for themselves. I really like the interface of Procreate, but honestly, like I've seen people work in Microsoft Paint.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So you don't have to have like big fancy expensive subscriptions for Photoshop and things like that in order to produce really great art. It's whatever you have on hand, it could probably do it nowadays.
Okay. Now, while you're at the show, typically you're going to get a lot of people coming up to your table. Imagine that someone comes up to your table and says, I'd like to know how to make a comic book. I want to make their first comic book. What piece of advice would you tell this person?
Probably the best advice would be just to stick with it, mainly because it's a very difficult industry, right? It's hard to break into. It's sometimes a very solitary profession, and if you are writing it yourself, you're drawing it yourself, you're lettering it yourself, it can be very insulated. So I guess my advice is almost two parts. One, make sure that you have a group of people whose opinion you actually can rely on, that aren't afraid to tell you the actual the truth about your project and can actually provide constructive criticism about it, but also to not let that criticism kind of slow you down, right? If you wanted to get into comics to begin with, you had a story to tell, so tell your story however you can do it, right? So whatever schedule that you want to set for yourself, just make sure that you actually follow through with it, because there's so many roadblocks in the way that are kind of almost designed to be there to prevent you from putting something out. And whether that's, a monetary roadblock or a creative roadblock or just with like distribution, just to keep at it, because eventually, you're going to put something out there that resonates with someone. And that's kind of what it's all about.
Oh, that's great advice, for sure, for sure. Now, with all the projects that you have on the go now and the future, I'm wondering, where do you recommend people go online to find out about you?
Okay, so I have an online store. You can grab my books at aliceofspades.com or the saga of the jackofspades.com. You can catch me mostly on Instagram these days, not so much on Facebook or Twitter or whatever the hell it is morphed into. So yeah, you can always find me on either TikTok making videos about tarot cards, or Instagram. And I think you can still pick up these books at your local brick and mortar comic book stores and your local comic book stores as well.
Okay. Well, Chase, those are all the questions I have for you, but I'm wondering, is there something I didn't ask that you'd like to get across in this interview?
Other than I am super excited to be returning to Toronto. I love whenever this really weird job of mine takes me over there. I get to hang out with some really cool people and chat with people at the convention. So yeah, I'm really excited to be heading over to Toronto in March.
Thanks to Chase for the chat. You can discover more about Chase online at aliceofspades.com and on Instagram at DRRUNANDDASH. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And remember to check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website. True North Country Comics is on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. You can follow True North Country Comics on most social media sites. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2024.